Welcome to this lecture by Christina Dam Jacobsen. It's a lecture concerning the article by Rain Dozier named The Power of Queer, How Guy Moms Challenge Heteronormative Assumptions About Mothering and Family. To start off, we have this Think, Pair, Share that I'll quickly run over the questions for with you guys. We got 10 questions. That will be the focus of today's lecture. Starting off with, what is the primary sociological focus in research about gender, and how can it be seen as flawed? What does it mean to be doing gender? Which role does the family play in doing gender? What is heteronormativity? Describe the heteronormative views of family life. Define queering and queering motherhood. How is the relationship between biological sex definitions and social constructs such as gender and family portrayed? Here we're thinking about how it's portrayed in the text. How does the politics of sameness affect same-sex parents' parenting actions? Define homonormativity and identify the hidden consequences of acceptance. And lastly, we have what is transgressive mothering. When looking at the primary sociological focus in gender research, through time, we'll see how there's been a big focus on this man versus woman perspective, where the sociological research has concerned itself with what it means to be either a man or a woman in a particular society. Additionally, it's been looking at how gender affects our interactions, our position in social structure, our access to power, and our life outcomes. Besides from this, the sociological research also focuses on and carries this assumption that our sex, which is from the sociological perspective, whether we biologically are man or female, or man or woman, so what our genitals are. The idea that this sex and our gender identity, which is whether we identify as man or woman, our gendered behavior, which is whether we behave in more of a masculine or feminine manner, and our sexual orientation, which will be whether you're gay, lesbian, heterosexual, or bisexual. Sociology has kind of been looking at this as how all of these four perspectives, or these four ways of perceiving sex and gender, how they're all supposed to be aligned and to be fitting each other. So sociology has been portraying how you most likely, if you have male genitals, will identify as a man, behave as a masculine figure, and the sexual orientation is a little more fluid, but in general, the greater picture here is that sociology has been working very much with these binaries where it's either or. It's either you're man or you're female. You either identify as this or this. And it's a very black and white picture that doesn't necessarily fit reality. Another aspect of this is how, in reality, there are more biological sexes than just man and woman. There are also the intersex category. And besides from this, there's a problem with this theory of binaries in a way that, in the alignment theory, that on paper, that's what they say, so everything is aligned, and it's these binaries that we work between. However, in reality, it's a lot more fluent than that, and you might not necessarily be or have the genitals of a man and at the same time identify as a man. You might identify as a woman, or something else. So there's like, the research so far hasn't really left room, well, the primary research at least hasn't really made room for these like different ways of going about this that aren't necessarily the straight up man female all the way through perspective. So it leaves a lot of room open for research to be done on fields where these binary positions and this alignment isn't necessarily the case. So the idea of doing gender places a lot of focus on how gender is created through interactions with other people, and how it can be seen kind of like a performance for which we are all also held accountable. So how you perform out from the gender that you're doing will be viewed by others, and they'll perceive your gender behavior through their lens of gender. So it's kind of a mixture of both like how you do gender and how they perceive gender. And that's how in the end we get the result of how gender is created through interactions. A thing about this is that it also very well underlines how gender is a social construct as it changes over time and place. This can both be like from now and then, say in 20 years. It can be how we perceive gender here in the US right now and how they might perceive gender in Saudi Arabia, or just another culture here. However, the main point is that this doing gender theory very well portrays how gender is something that is changeable, and therefore underlines how gender is a social construct, which is also one of the reasons why gender and sex doesn't necessarily go and get a, well, aren't necessarily as aligned as we would assume through the previous mentioned sociological main theory of gender. The thing about gender and doing gender is also that we learn to do gender as kids, but then we continue to relearn and revise how to do this gender over time, and depending on the social situations that we are in. So this means that how a little boy is doing acting masculine at the age of 10 will not be the same as how he is masculine at the age of 35, as well as like these social arenas where you might be acting masculine in one way when you go to the gym, and in another way when you're at your house at home, and a whole nother way when you go to your work. So it's this idea that, yeah, again, it's learned, relearned, and revised. And then there's this idea with the doing gender that parents have a role in it as well. So parents are seen as accountable for their children's gender performances. So not only are you acting and interacting with your gender and someone else is perceiving it, your parents are also seen to have a part in this, because they are the one that are seen as one of the primary places where you are going to be taught how to do gender, which we will get further into in just a second. When we move further into this idea of how family is playing a role in how we do gender and how parents are playing a role in this, the first thing to stop up and look at is how within the family unit and the household there are gendered tasks. So this kind of underlines how gender is tied to actions in a way that there are some tasks that we perceive more as female tasks, as well as some are more like the male. So in more traditional thinking, this could be how the man is supposed to go out and get money for the household, as well as how he's supposed to be fixing the car or like being a handyman or whatever. And on the other side, there's the woman that's supposed to be like raising the kids, keeping the house clean, cooking food, and all these things. So we kind of place a gender on a task out from like the general idea of who is most likely seen to be doing it. At the same time, the family serves as an important site for both creating and maintaining gender and gender inequality, as it is in the house that we learn, well, it is in the family unit that we learn a lot about gender from our parents and what we see them do and what they teach us about gender as well. So it's an arena where we learn a lot about gender that is going to take us on forward, and this will be on both the good and the bad sides of gender and gender inequality. Then there's this factor about how parents do gender in different ways. So this can be how they involve themselves in the household, and the actions they take, so the gender tasks or just the actions they or the tasks they take upon themselves, and how they portray gender through their own actions. However, it can also be how they, to or through the kids, do gender in different ways. So that could be how they dress a girl in a dress and cute little red shoes and put her hair in a certain way, or by controlling the toys that they play with, kind of separating it, like girl and boy toys, or maybe a more like mixed approach. But the idea is that they kind of persuade or affect how you are going to be seeing gender through how they do gender towards you. Within this idea of gender tasks, there is a fine line between how some tasks are given due to physical necessity and others are more simply due in gender. So an example of this is how a mother is kind of tied to the household in another way, through like the more normative view, because she is the one that breastfeeds the children, she's the one that gives birth, she has to be at home in the beginning anyways, she's taking care of the household, and the man kind of goes off to get money for the family. So it's like this physical necessity that she's home because she has to use her body for functions for the kids. However, where this kind of goes over to how we're simply doing gender, not anymore like the physical necessities, kind of a fine line, and it's really hard to find. It's kind of a gray area, I guess. And actually through studies among same-sex parents, where you take out this physical necessity factor, it's been proven that it's not so much the gender that controls necessarily everything, like how we assign tasks within the household, but it's more like connected to power and work. So it will most likely be the person, or the tendency is that the person that has the highest income of the two will be the one that is less likely to work in the household. And this doesn't necessarily connect to whether or not this person is also the one working the most. It is purely out from like who earns the most money will pull themselves more away from the work at the house. So therefore we can kind of see, due to these same-sex studies, that this divide of tasks isn't necessarily based on your sex or your gender, but on the behavioral expectations and the power inequalities. So yes, a little bit on the gender in a way that there are some behavioral expectations to what you might be perceived as doing as a woman, but just as much in the fact that there are these power inequalities and like the amount of money that you earn, etc. when looking at heteronormativity, it is best described or defined as these assumptions and practices grounded in seeing heterosexuality as the norm, which means that it's kind of grounded in the belief that, that heterosexuality is a norm, and that an individual's sex, their gender, their sexual orientation, and their gendered social roles are aligned or set to be in harmony. If this sounds just kind of repetitive to you, it's because it's kind of the same ideas that we visited in the slide with the sociological focus on gender studies. Many of these things go again with like this heteronormative perspective in the study as well, that this heterosexuality is the norm, and that's kind of therefore why we study it. Another thing that is worth mentioning here is that heteronormativity doesn't only suggest a norm of how to do it, which kind of lays in normativity of the word. However, it also organizes social, political, and economic structures, so it's very like deeply embedded. And again, we can also see this idea in the fact that it controls our academic point of view, our research point of view onto the world. Looking closer at this heteronormative point of view and looking at heteronormativity while looking at family, there is a clear focus within heteronormativity on the nuclear family, which will consist of one mom, one dad, and their biological kids. And this kind of correlates very well with the fact that they focus very much on the alignment of sex and the gendered behavior, as mentioned in the previous slides, like the alignment in general of your gendered behavior, your sexuality, and these things. And an example of this could be how they would assume that a woman only exhibits behaviors, attitudes, and interests associated with females and femininity. So again, this portrayal of alignment all the way through the categories. And then when you look at heteronormativity, the family is very closely tied to biology. That means a family unit is defined out from biology in a way, where it's perceived as, well, you're perceived as the real parents to a child if you are the biological parents to the child. And this kind of collides a little bit with the idea that family is in reality a social construct that once again can change over time and place. But the idea is that family isn't necessarily a set thing, but within heteronormativity, family is being tied to this biological aspect of that a man and a woman is needed to reproduce, and the outcome of this is the children that are the biological children of these parents, which makes them these real parents, so to say. And through this, heteronormativity kind of creates a penalizing effect on the LGBTQ plus society, where it kind of penalizes and affects the parents in different ways of these LGBTQ plus families. So this can, for example, be that they deny the family's existence at school, or in medical forms or other official forms that you have to fill out. and it can exclude them from everyday activities and deny them legal rights. And in the text, I use this example of a woman who is on her deathbed in the hospital, and she's not allowed to have her family visit her because the legal documents does not see them as her actual family, because they don't fit into this heteronormative point of view on what a family is. So this norm of what a family is supposed to be from the nuclear family point of view kind of makes it really hard for the LGBTQ plus families to function and get like the same rights as a family and be portrayed as a family, even though, once again, the concept of family is a social construct, so it should be able to be fitted to other aspects in this one. However, social constructs also typically follows the norm, and since heteronormativity is the norm, that just kind of goes hand in hand. And when talking about these norms and the values in society, it makes great sense to move on and look into queering and the queering motherhood, which is also mentioned in the text, where queer can be is basically described as whatever is at odds with the normal, and in reality, any aspect of life that is gendered can be queered. So once again, it's this idea that whatever is at odds with the normal, the legitimate or the dominant, can be seen as being queered, and it kind of involves this transgressive position, or something that might it is something that might deconstruct or destabilize the accepted ideas about like what we portray things as being right. So it will go in and kind of challenge and destabilize these norms that we, I guess, kind of see as rules in a way in society, and like kind of push the boundaries a little bit in it. With this definition of queer being something that deconstructs and destabilizes and is whatever that is at odds with the normal, queering motherhood then serves to deconstruct the norms around motherhood. So it is any act of mothering that is transgressive as well, or deconstructs norms around mothering or motherhood. So this can be, for example, single mothers, or a single parent thing, but single mothers, families where the mother is the primary earner of money, guy moms, which is what this text is also talking about, and other categories like that. So everything that kind of goes away from this heteronormative way, I want to say, of portraying motherhood. So the thing about queer and queer families is also that their formation has a tendency to challenge the nuclear normative family model, which is what we just kind of touched upon right before. And when it comes to this part of like queer family, we're looking at either, for example, well, there are several ways, but examples of it can be how trans women and trans men can't procreate within the sex that they identify as, identify with, and how same-sex couples can't procreate biologically through just their couple. They have to bring in a third part to help them out. So it's kind of this idea of how these queer families challenge the biological aspect of procreation, and goes against this normative idea of how the family consists of a mom and a dad that can reproduce and get the kids, to put it straight. So it goes in and kind of pushes the boundaries of what a family is and a family model in general. So when looking at the biological sex versus the social constructs, which is this question that might not be as easily identified in the text necessarily, but they kind of talk about it in different ways throughout the text. It's kind of this idea of like questioning whether a thing is a social construct or biological fact. So throughout the text, they kind of keep talking about how these things are kind of mixed up. They're either being misunderstood to overlap more, or believed or assumed to be more overlapping, which by this I mean how even though, if we take the family for example, even though that it's a social construct that can change over time and place, we as a society have kind of assigned the biological sex definitions onto it, that it has to have a dad, which is a man, and a mom, who's a woman, and in the same way as like how we kind of keep confusing sex and gender in society. So how gender is more like the behavioral aspects of masculinity and femininity, and sex is this biological fact, that even though they like to portray it that way, it's still not binary, because there is this extra aspect of intersex. But for the sake of the theory, let's keep it for the binary right now. So moving between how we keep kind of forcing the biological fact of sex over the social constructs of family and gender, which kind of creates a lot of confusion with regards to whether it's a construct or social construct or biological fact, in a way of that we as a society might misunderstand what's happening at some point. And by trying to force these boxes of sex down over the social constructs, there are going to be some people that fall outside of the boxes. And yeah, I guess it's just an attempt to try to show how there's this ongoing battle between the point of view of these things, and how we kind of, as a society, miss the point of social constructs and try to fit things into these binary boxes of sex. So social constructs are generally, or what I'm trying to say is that social constructs are being tied up on binaries and biological sex, even though they aren't necessarily in reality. However, since these are very much like the binaries and the biological sex are very much the norms that we live out of in a heteronormative society, this kind of seems to be the only way that these social constructs works as well. It gets a little messy in there, but I guess that just kind of works as underlining the fact of how messy this division is, and how intertwined it's become throughout the debates. When looking at the politics of sameness, one of the key terms here is this gold standard. And the gold standard would be families that include one mother, one father, and their biological children, as also kind of brought up under the heteronormative perspective of family earlier. So this nuclear family that is tied through biology. And this gold standard is in the politics of sameness is the thing that we kind of measure people out from, and very much what we measure LGBTQ plus families out from. So how well they fit into this, and how much they differ from this gold standard. And being measured to this, LGBTQ plus families keep trying to work in a way to minimize the difference between their families and the gold standard families, which is also why there is a limited amount of research on this field, because they work so hard to minimize these differences, so we won't see a whole lot of them. However, an interesting fact about it is that the little research that we do have kind of show how the statistics are in the favor of same-sex parents, in a way that in the text there's an example of how how children in heterosexual families are more likely to experience abuse, experience and report abuse, compared to children from lesbian-headed families, which is a really good statistic to have in your favor. But because the families work so hard within this sense of, or the idea of politics of sameness, to de-emphasize these differences between their family unit and the golden standard, once again, it's very limited, that the knowledge that we have on it, and it also kind of removes some of these good parts in it. So I guess in a way you can say that it serves to de-emphasize the difference between these families, both on the good and the bad parts, so they also don't get the credit for what works better in same-sex parenthood. So another thing about these politics of sameness is some of the assumptions that follows LGBTQ plus families, where one of the main assumptions with same-sex partners and their children would be that their children are more likely to turn out to be lesbian, gay, or bisexual than other children. Here referred to children of the gold standard family. And this has a negative, this assumption that people talk about, but the assumption that hasn't necessarily been proven, but it's kind of like roaming between people, kind of works in, makes the LGBTQ parents feel extra pressure, as you can say. I mean, more pressure to raise their children in a way where they turn out to be perfectly normal, so to say. So this would concern their gender presentation, and like trying to storm away from this idea of the assumption that people believe that they are more likely to turn out with a queer sexuality, I guess you can call it. So they start overcompensating in an attempt to justify how excuse me, how and why they still kind of deserve a role in like the participation of parenting, and how they are still good enough to be parents. Another assumption is how there's this idea that children have to grow up with a male and a female role model to steer them in the right way with regards to like learning how to do gender and such. However, a general misconception is in this perspective that typically hits same-sex parents, because there will be a lack of either the male or the female role within the family unit, is that you can get these role models without the family unit as well, or outside of, sorry, not without, but outside of the family unit. So it might not be in the household, but then it might be a teacher or a band instructor or something else. So you can find it outside the family unit is the overall point here. And then another thing that the text points out that kind of works in the favor of the LGBTQ plus families is how at least the author believes that children growing up in same-sex families or queered families have a greater awareness of how gendered behaviors and social roles are optional and not inevitable, so they can choose not to go with one gendered behavior, even though that might be the one that's perceived as the norm for a girl, or whatever. So it gives this room to like kind of roam freely and make your decision on your behavior and not living in these binaries that we are being taught from society. I want to start off with defining homonormativity to make this flip side of the acceptance a lot clearer. So the idea of homonormativity is that it can be defined as societal acceptance of gays and lesbians, which on the surface sounds really good, and definitely sounds like something that we should move towards. However, the flip side of this acceptance, which also kind of goes into the definition of homonormativity, is that it is the societal acceptance of gays and lesbians who have the ability to express, or out from the fact of like the level of their ability to express heteronormative values and behaviors. So the gays and lesbians are legitimized through gender conventionality, and in this way they are accepted as being different if they hide away their difference. So if they hide their queer side, they can be accepted by society through homonormativity. So it's kind of a flip side idea of what acceptance looks like, because one could criticize this from the fact that it's pretty easy to accept someone from being different if you leave out the idea of them being different. But overall, this is the conception of homonormativity, and its flip sides of acceptance. How we will, as a society, will accept you for being different if you suppress your differences and act like the rest of us, and follow the norms that we follow. So to start off this slide, I just want to define social position, as this might be helpful later on in the discussion of transgressive mothering. So a social position refers to the status or the position that one has in relation to other individuals or institutions. These institutions can be, for example, employers, family, school, or the legal system, or in reality any other sort of institution. But the social position is the position that you were in the interaction with these either individuals or institutions. Then there's the concept of gendered social positions, which is kind of taking the idea of gendering things and putting it down over the social position, in a way you can say. So a gendered social position would be a social position that will generally or typically be described or prescribed to just one sex. So something that a social position we typically connect with either females or males. So yeah, this is kind of the idea of the social position. Moving further into transgressive mothering, is described as being something that has a lot of connections to some of the most important aspects of queering. And in the text, they describe it as this focus on deviant cases of gender, sexual behavior, and or identities, where this idea of them not fitting neatly into these assumed categories or boxes that society wants them to, and these, like, the categories of the binaries and the binaries of sex, and the binaries in general that we talked a lot about throughout this presentation, how they don't fit into these binaries in either of these, like in either the gendered, the sexual behavior, or the gendered identity. So it becomes deviant in a way that it doesn't fit into the norm, and it kind of, I guess you can kind of say that it rebels against, or it kind of pushes against the norms and the like set foundation of those, by being outside of it and differing from it. So an example of transgressive mothering would be the author himself and how he defines himself in the text. So in the text, he states that he has the social position of a guy mom, with some masculine or making him a masculine trans-identified mother, where the fact that he is queer here and that he is masculine up towards, well, is that he is masculine while identifying as a mother, because a lot of the things that we prescribe to motherhood doesn't necessarily correspond with the masculine aspect. So what he says is that he feels like a man, and he identifies as a man. He does not relate to being a woman at all. So in a way, he is a very stereotypical transgender in that way. However, there is the aspect of how he sees himself as a mother and not a father, despite that he feels like a man. And that's kind of where he breaks with the stereotypical idea of transgendering, or transgender, as he sees himself as a mother, which also is what makes him fall into this category of deviant cases, because he is taking this masculine aspect and mixing it with motherhood that through the norms is something very opposite from this. So what it does is that this trans-identified or genderqueer idea of masculine mothers disrupt with, as I said, kind of disrupt with our idea that femininity and motherhood naturally align, and that femininity is parts of what gives motherhood and this female aspect in it. So it actually also, in this way, kind of serves as an example of how we as a society has connected the binary positions of mother and father, and we've connected it actually with the idea of the sexes again. So first of all, it's a very binary setup of mother and father. However, at the same time, we ascribe motherhood female characteristics, the female sex, and feminine behavior. And on the other hand, we have fatherhood that we ascribe to the male sex that then behaves masculine, and so you kind of get the idea of how, like, again, we put it up in these binary positions, even though transgressive mothering is one of the aspects that kind of breaks with this binary position. And the overall idea then becomes how this transgressive mothering can be seen as a deviant behavior that kind of pushes the boundaries of our norms and values and the binary positions that we ascribe to motherhood and fatherhood, and kind of shows us how it can be said to, like, kind of break with the overall idea of what a mother and a father, well, in this case a mother and motherhood, kind of consist of. So now that we are done with today's lecture on the text, we move further into the multiple choice quiz for the assigned to this lecture. So the first question is, the primary sociological focus in the research of gender can be described described as. And then you have the 4 different options or answers possibilities coming up here, where it has been clearly marked that C is the right answer. So the binary of man and woman with alignment in sex, gender identity, gender behavior, and sexual orientation. Moving on to question 2, we have the assumptions and practices grounded in the belief that heterosexuality is the norm, is the definition of. And with the 4 answer opportunities, we here have heteronormativity. The answer is B, heteronormativity. Question 3 is, what is queering motherhood? With the 4 answers coming up here, we have the actual answer being, or the correct answer being A, any act of mothering that is seen as transgressive or to deconstruct norms around mothering. The 4th multiple choice question is, what are the requirements to be real parents? And within the 4 answers here, D would be the correct answer, being biologically connected to your children. When we hit question 5, what is doing gender? The 4 options are as you see now, and the actual or the correct answer for this question would be D, which is all of the above. So the rest of the answers. Moving on to question 6, what is the gold standard? It is families, the correct answer here would be D, so the answer D is both A and C. That together make the correct answer for question 6. Then we have 7, where blank disrupts with the idea that femininity and motherhood naturally align and that women are uniquely qualified to engage in mothering. With the answer opportunities coming up here, the right answer would be A, transgressive mothering. Moving on, question 8 is, blank is a societal acceptance of gays and lesbians based on their ability to act gender conventional. And with the answer opportunities here, the right answer would be B, homonormativity. Question 9, what best describes the portrayed relationship between biological sex definitions and social constructs of family and gender? This was a little tricky slide earlier. The answers opportunities coming up here, and the right answer would be D, both A and C. The 10th and last multiple choice quiz question is, what is the connection between family and doing gender? Out of the 4 options here, the correct answer would be A, parents can do gender through their own actions and on their children's behalf. At the end of this presentation, I want to suggest a class activity that I have chosen to name the Answer Garland. And this actually very well presents the overall idea. So for this activity, you need to bring or have your students bring colored paper, scissors, glue sticks and or tape, and pens to class, as they will be needed for the exercise. The idea is that you divide the classroom into even-sized groups that could be table groups or whatever works with the number of students that are in the classroom the day of the activity. And then you bring back in the Think, Pair, Share questions from earlier, put them back up on the board so that everyone can see them. You will be moving through these one at a time, and you'll do it in a time interval to make sure that this game doesn't go on forever. And the time intervals that you work with can be adapted to the remaining class time or whatever you see fit for the lecture that day. It is very much changeable and adaptable. The students are then to answer the questions from the Think, Pair, Share in their groups, again one at a time. And to answer these questions, they have to write down details, definitions, and or answers on a colored strip of paper, glue it together, and make a garland out of the answers. So that is why it's called the answer garland. Students are supposed to put, and are only allowed to put, one detail, answer part, or definition per strip of paper, which makes great sense for the next part of this activity. That is that the goal of the activity is to make the longest garland of answers to the question. It is an exercise or activity that enforces collaborative, or that kind of give space for them working collaboratively and helping each other to achieve the goal of getting the longest garland. At the end of each time interval, each group will present their garlands to the rest of the class and their garland answers, so they can be checked if there are anything that are duplicated or whether it's correct or not. And then you are to count, or the group are to count, the number of rings on the garland that have been made, to see who came up with the most garland circles for this question, and therefore who had the longest and I guess won. The idea is, though, not that this is supposed to be an actual competition about who is doing best or who knows best. It's supposed to be a fun and creative way to work with the material and work collaboratively and share knowledge in between groups. And by presenting it to each other, it gives everybody a chance to learn from each other's as well while reading up the garland answers. At the end of this activity, the students would have gone through all the questions of the Think, Pair, Share, and will be left with 10 educational garland rings, or strains, I guess, to represent the work through today's class activity. If you are short in time, you can choose to adjust this by not doing all 10 questions as well. But the overall idea is to play with it and be creative with the knowledge that the group share.